Lulu Audio wishes you a peaceful and relaxing evening. Close your eyes and let yourself drift gently with the sound of our rain. Tonight, we invite you into a quiet world, a place where love speaks softly and time moves a little slower. Let your thoughts settle like falling leaves. Let the noise of the day fade into the background, and let this story carry you gently, slowly, into the warmth of memory, devotion, and quiet love. This is the story of two souls, one who begins to forget, and one who chooses to remember, for both of them. No rush, no noise, no need to stay alert. Just breathe, just listen, and allow your heart to rest in the stillness. Now, the rain is falling, the night is here, and the story begins. It was the kind of afternoon where sunlight didn't blaze. It poured gently across rooftops, like warm honey slipping through the cracks of the city. The air was still. A soft breeze passed now and then, carrying the scent of pavement and early autumn. Emma wandered through the aisles of the supermarket without much purpose. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Sometimes people go out not because they need something, but because the quiet in their hearts becomes too loud. In her hand was an iced coffee. The ice mostly melted, the flavor thinned and watery, but she kept sipping it anyway, absent-mindedly. Lately, she had been forgetting things. Nothing big at first. Where she placed her phone, her keys, whether she had locked the door. But today, it was her wallet. Her breath caught a little as she retraced her steps. The crowd moved around her like waves, but she pushed forward, scanning the floors, the corners, the checkout lanes. Her pace quickened. Her heart, too. Then suddenly, a jolt. She'd bumped into someone. Coffee splashed onto a work-worn shirt. She gasped, apologizing quickly, fumbling for napkins. The man she had run into stood completely still. He didn't speak. When Emma looked up, she found herself staring into the eyes of someone not angry, not surprised, just calm. His gaze wasn't soft exactly, but it wasn't harsh either. It was the kind of stillness you find in a lake right before dusk, where silence feels full rather than empty. She blinked, a little embarrassed, a little unsettled. "Sorry," she said softly, offering a brief, awkward smile. Then she turned and walked away. The coffee in her hand now tasted like nothing. The man, Daniel, stood there a moment longer. He was a carpenter. Most days his hands were dusty from pine wood and old paint. He was used to working in silence, used to being alone, and used to forgetting the faces of strangers after a few hours. But not this one. There was something about the girl with tired eyes and coffee-stained fingers that lingered. Not just her expression, but the way she seemed distracted, like she had been searching for something long before she lost her wallet. He didn't know her name, didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but a quiet thread had been tugged inside him, like the soft creak of a floorboard in a familiar house. That night, Emma sat on her small balcony, watching the sky turn lavender. She couldn't recall the faces of the people who had walked past her in the store, but she remembered his, quiet, still, unreadable. His eyes weren't beautiful. They were steady. And for some reason, that steadiness stayed with her. She had no idea that a new chapter had just opened in her life, not with a grand moment, but a simple accident. A coffee spill, an apology, and a silence that felt strangely safe. Some stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin when two lives, lost in different ways, quietly collide. The afternoon unfolded slowly, like a page turning in an old book. Sunlight filtered through the tall buildings in golden ribbons, stretching across sidewalks and slipping into shop fronts. The air was warm, but not stifling. A late summer breeze moved gently between the leaves, stirring shadows on the ground. Emma walked alone through the supermarket, her steps unhurried. She wasn't shopping for anything urgent, just wandering, her mind elsewhere. Some days she found comfort in quiet, ordinary places. She liked the way the shelves were neatly arranged, the way soft music played overhead, the way no one expected her to talk. In her hand was an iced coffee, mostly melted. She sipped it anyway, barely tasting it. Her thoughts drifted between errands she had forgotten and phone calls she hadn't returned. Lately, she'd been misplacing things. Her keys, her notes, once even her shoes. And now, it was her wallet. She retraced her steps, scanning each corner of the store with a rising tightness in her chest. There was no panic, not yet. Only the quiet, sinking awareness that something small had slipped through her grasp again. Her shoulders were slightly hunched as she turned a corner too quickly and collided with someone. The jolt spilled what was left of her coffee. Drops splattered across the pale blue of a worn work shirt. The man she'd run into barely moved. He stood solid, like a wall of warmth and quiet. Emma blinked, startled. Her hands moved to her bag instinctively, searching for something to offer. A tissue, an apology, anything. But time seemed to slow. Her thoughts dulled. The man didn't speak. He looked at her, not with annoyance, not with surprise, just calm. His eyes, a shade between stone and sky, held no sharpness. There was a stillness in him that made the air around them pause. She met his gaze briefly, then lowered her eyes. Her lips curved slightly, more out of habit than intention, before she stepped around him and kept walking. Her coffee now tasted like water. The man, Daniel, remained in place for a few moments longer. He'd been pushing a cart full of narrow wooden planks, just having left the small supply shop next door. Sawdust still clung to the cuffs of his sleeves. His hands, rough and calloused from years of shaping wood, had barely flinched from the impact. He watched her disappear into the aisle ahead, her figure small and quietly determined. There was something in the way she moved, like she was carrying more than just a handbag and coffee, like her thoughts had grown too heavy for her to walk any faster. Daniel wasn't one to remember strangers. His life followed a quiet routine. Early mornings, long hours in the workshop, the hum of tools, and the scent of pine. But the girl, with hair slightly tousled and a distracted kind of grace, settled in his thoughts like dust on a windowsill, unnoticed at first, but lingering. He didn't know her name, didn't expect to see her again. But something about that moment, the soft clumsiness of it, the way neither of them had rushed to speak, stayed with him longer than he expected. That evening, Emma sat on her small balcony as the light faded. The sky stretched wide, painted in shades of blue and violet. Below, the city buzzed faintly, but up here, it was quiet. She held her coffee cup in both hands, though the drink was long gone. Her mind drifted. Not to work, not to errands, but to the man in the blue shirt. She couldn't quite remember his face, only the feeling it left behind. It wasn't attraction. Not exactly. It was stillness, like standing near a calm lake, like silence that didn't feel empty. There had been no conversation, no exchange of names, no lingering glance. And yet, for some reason, she remembered him. Perhaps it was the way he didn't flinch, the way his eyes held hers without expectation. Or maybe it was simply the strange comfort in knowing someone could collide with your day and not ask for anything in return. She watched the sky until it turned dark. In her chest, something quiet unfolded, something that didn't have a name yet. A whisper, a thread, the beginning of a story she didn't know she was stepping into, a story that had already begun, with a bump, a spill, and a silence more tender than any words. The days that followed moved gently, like slow rivers winding through quiet places. The city, caught between late summer and early fall, softened under a veil of overcast skies and the scent of changing leaves. And somewhere within, Emma continued moving through her quiet routines, not knowing that something had already begun to change. A week after the accidental encounter, Emma visited a small carpentry workshop tucked between narrow alleys, a place she'd found through a client who wanted handcrafted furniture for a new cafe. The door was old, painted in chipped green. The name above it was faded. She liked it instantly. Inside, it smelled of pine and varnish. Wooden planks leaned against the walls. Tools hung neatly in place. The air buzzed with the low hum of sanding machines and the scent of fresh-cut oak. And then she saw him, Daniel. He was bent over a table, hands working a slab of wood with slow, deliberate rhythm. When he noticed her, he paused, just for a moment. Their eyes met briefly. No surprise, no recognition in words. Only that same stillness from before, now dressed in sawdust and sunlight. Emma waited near the door, feeling strangely unsure of herself. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to remember him, much less see him again in this tucked-away corner of the city. Eventually, she spoke to the assistant instead, discussing designs and measurements. Daniel continued his work. but once or twice she caught him glancing over, not with curiosity, but with something quieter, harder to name, something like memory. That visit became 2, then 3, then something close to routine. Emma began showing up not just to check on furniture, but to sit quietly in the corner of the workshop with her sketch pad. She'd bring coffee, 2 cups, one for her, and one she placed on the bench beside him. He never asked for it, but he always drank it. She talked sometimes, not much, only little things, about clients, about color palettes and textures, about a dream she had where she lived by a lake. He rarely responded, sometimes only with a nod, sometimes not at all. But she didn't mind, because his silence didn't feel dismissive. It felt grounding, steady. And Emma, who had spent years chasing deadlines and proving her worth in every room she walked into, found unexpected peace in sitting beside someone who never asked her to perform. Daniel, in his own quiet way, began waiting for her. He swept the floor more carefully in the mornings, made sure there was space at the end of the bench where she liked to sit. When she left, he often paused in his work, listening for the fading sound of her steps before returning to his tools. He didn't ask her about her life, didn't pry or press, but he noticed things. How her eyes always looked tired, even when she smiled. How she fidgeted with the ring on her right hand when she was deep in thought. How she always closed her eyes for a moment before sipping her coffee, as if bracing herself for something too strong. One afternoon, rain tapped gently against the workshop windows. Emma had stayed longer than usual. She sat on the floor, papers spread out beside her, shoes off. The room was warm, filled with the scent of cedar and paint. Without meaning to, she fell asleep. Daniel noticed the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Her arms curled in, her head tilted toward the shelves. A curl of hair rested across her cheek. He moved slowly, carefully. Took a folded cloth from the nearby table and laid it over her shoulders. Then returned to his work. But his movements were quieter now, as if the air itself had changed, softened. They never spoke of what was forming between them. There were no confessions, no need for labels, only the sound of tools, the scratch of pencil on paper, the soft clink of cups being set down beside one another. And in that space, quiet, warm, undemanding, something grew. Not loud, not sudden, but steady, like roots beneath the surface, like light through old windows. They were 2 people from different worlds. She, with her sketches and stories. He, with his wood and silence. But somehow, they began to share a rhythm. And in the midst of all the noise the world could make, deadlines, traffic, expectations, their days together were the quietest, the simplest, and the most beautiful. The days that followed were quiet, not empty, but full in a different way. Full of small routines, soft pauses, and the kind of presence that doesn't require words. For Emma, the pace of life slowed just enough to notice the way the light changed through the windows, the way the seasons whispered their arrival in the color of leaves or the scent of the air. The workshop became part of her world, not suddenly and not all at once, but like warmth spreading through fingers on a cold morning. She began coming more often, not just for the project she had commissioned, but for the quiet company that lived there. The company of Daniel. He didn't ask why she came so frequently. He simply made space for her. In the corner of the workshop was a small bench, old and worn smooth with time. One morning, it had been cleared of dust. On another day, she noticed a thin cushion had appeared, modest but thoughtful. From then on, it was her place. Emma brought her sketchbook and coffee, always 2 cups. The second was never requested, never refused. She placed it at the same spot on the table each time. Daniel took it silently, drank slowly, sometimes only half. But the act, the offering, became its own quiet ritual. There was no need to fill the silence with conversation. She spoke occasionally, softly. Her words were like leaves drifting from a tree, light, sometimes catching the air. She talked about the project she was working on, the strange behavior of clients, or a memory triggered by the scent of varnish. Sometimes she didn't speak at all. Daniel listened, not with nods or affirmations, but with the kind of presence that let her know he was there, listening without judgment, without hurry. Theirs was a companionship without urgency. As days passed, Emma noticed his rhythm. The way he wiped down his tools each evening, lining them up as if tucking them in for the night. The way he always touched the wood before beginning, a brief, silent moment of connection. The way he paused before using a chisel, taking a breath, steadying himself. She admired his hands. Warm, strong, careful. They told a story more honest than words could. A man who had shaped things, who had learned patience through grain and splinter. In his presence, she found stillness. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that feels like rest. She began staying longer. Sometimes the sunlight had already turned gold before she left. Other times, she watched the dust dance in the beams of light, feeling like she was inside a painting no one had ever seen with her. One afternoon, it rained. A gentle, gray sort of rain. Not wild, not cold, just soft enough to hush the city. The windows of the workshop blurred with droplets, and the smell of wet earth mixed with cedar and oil. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, her back resting against a cabinet, sketching half-heartedly. Her thoughts had drifted elsewhere, and soon, so did her eyes. Without meaning to, she fell asleep. It wasn't a deep sleep, more like a surrender, a moment of letting go. Her head tilted gently to the side, fingers still curled around the edge of her sketchbook. Daniel noticed. He didn't call her name. He didn't make a sound. He simply rose from his seat, walked to a nearby shelf, and took down a soft, folded cloth. He approached her slowly, careful not to wake her, and draped it lightly over her shoulders. Then he returned to his work. But for the rest of the afternoon, His movements were slower, more measured, as if even the tools understood that something delicate had settled into the room. She never mentioned the moment, and neither did he. But the next day, when she arrived, there was a small folded blanket beside her usual cushion. She smiled faintly when she saw it, said nothing, sat down, and in that silence, something deepened. It wasn't romance in the way stories usually describe. There were no declarations, no lingering glances, no fire. It was something quieter, a companionship made of shared stillness, of coffee placed without words, of breath moving in the same rhythm, of one presence becoming the soft echo of the other. The world outside kept rushing. Emails kept piling up. Projects kept coming and going. People talked fast and expected faster. But inside that little workshop, inside that tiny, ordinary corner of time, the world slowed down, and two strangers became something more. Not lovers, not quite friends, but companions in quiet. And in all the noise of life, those were the most beautiful days. There are moments in life when everything seems to fall into rhythm, when two people settle into each other's presence like matching bookends, holding silence between them without effort. And then, there are moments when that rhythm begins to slip. Not suddenly, not violently, just quietly, like a curtain shifting in the wind, until the room no longer feels quite the same. Emma and Daniel still met in the workshop. She still arrived with coffee, still sat on her bench, still pulled out her sketchbook and smoothed its pages with careful hands. But something had changed. It began with a dinner, a small gathering at Emma's family home. Her parents had invited her to bring someone special, and after quiet hesitation, she had mentioned Daniel. He arrived on time, in a neatly ironed shirt and clean shoes that still carried traces of workshop dust. He brought a bottle of wine he'd never tasted and flowers wrapped in plain paper. Emma's parents welcomed him politely, their smiles careful. The kind of welcome that feels more like a test than a greeting. The conversation was light, measured. They asked about his work, how long he'd been doing it, what kind of clients he served, whether it was enough to support a future. Daniel answered honestly, briefly, without flourish. He sat at the polished dinner table, aware of every fork, every wine glass, every unspoken question hanging between courses. The lighting felt too bright, the chairs too soft, the air too formal. He didn't belong there, and he knew it. Emma watched him closely. She noticed how still his hands had become, how his shoulders stayed square but quiet. He was holding himself in, like a man shrinking inward without moving at all. They left early, and on the walk back, the night was filled not with tension, but with the absence of ease. Neither of them spoke much. The streetlights flickered above them, their footsteps out of sync. She didn't ask what he was thinking. He didn't offer. But something between them had shifted, not broken, just loosened. In the days that followed, Daniel grew quieter. He began working longer hours. His focus sharpened. His shoulders seemed heavier. When Emma arrived, he greeted her with the same nod, the same coffee ritual, the same space on the bench. But the pauses between their connection stretched longer. He no longer lingered when she spoke. He no longer looked up when she laughed. And though he still took the coffee she brought, he rarely finished it. Emma noticed every small thing, but she didn't say anything either. She sat beside him as always, her sketchbook open but untouched. Sometimes she traced patterns on the blank page just to keep her hands busy. Her eyes followed his, trying to guess where he'd gone. She wrote in her notebook more often now. Quiet entries, half sentences. He still smiles, but not at me. Maybe I'm imagining it. But the air feels thinner. Today he didn't ask me to stay. One evening, she stayed longer than usual. The workshop had gone quiet. Outside, the sky burned orange, then faded to ash. The air inside was still. Daniel packed up his tools slowly, while Emma lingered near the back, watching shadows lengthen on the wooden floor. She wanted to ask him, wanted to reach for the space between them and pull it closed. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was fear, or pride, or the sense that if she asked and he answered honestly, she wouldn't like what she heard. So she said nothing, and Daniel, whose thoughts had been circling the same worry for days, also stayed silent. In his heart, he wasn't angry. He wasn't drifting because of something she'd done. He was simply afraid. Afraid that she deserved more than a man who worked with his hands. Afraid that her life would one day outgrow his. Afraid that what he could give, simplicity, steadiness, silence, would never be enough. So he stepped back, quietly, not out of cruelty, but out of care. He didn't know how to say that he loved her in the only way he knew how. By giving her space, by preparing for her absence, even before she asked for it. That week, Emma fell asleep in the workshop again. She hadn't meant to. Her head rested on her arm, body curled slightly on the bench. The room had dimmed around her. Daniel noticed. He watched her for a long moment. Then, as before, he gently covered her with the soft cloth. He sat near her, listening to her breath, not touching her, not speaking. And in that small, still moment, he whispered something in his heart, something she would never hear, not because he didn't want her to, but because love, when it feels most fragile, often hides in silence. There was no goodbye, no clear line where closeness became distance, only a slow unfolding, like the way fog creeps in without sound, like the way two people can sit beside each other and still feel alone. And in that silence, soft, aching, unresolved, the most painful part wasn't the distance itself. It was that neither of them knew how to reach across it. Not yet. The first signs were small. So small, in fact, that they passed like soft creases in fabric. Nothing to worry about, nothing to name. Just minor slips that could be explained away by distraction, fatigue, or the noise of too many things on her mind. Emma had always been thoughtful. Her mind was sharp, her attention to detail precise. She noticed the color of the sky before it rained, remembered where Daniel had left his spare brush, knew the exact temperature where coffee tasted best. But lately, things began to blur at the edges. At first, it was a word lost in conversation, then a name, then the reason she had walked into a room. One afternoon, she stared at her car keys resting in the fridge, placed there without a memory of doing so. She stood for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In the end, she closed the door gently and told no one. The workshop remained her sanctuary. She still came, still sat in her spot, still brought coffee, still watched Daniel work with quiet reverence. But her sketchbook stayed closed more often now. She would take it out, then forget what she wanted to draw. Her pencil would hover above the page, uncertain. Daniel noticed. He didn't speak of it, but he began paying closer attention. The way she hesitated before unlocking the workshop door. The way her eyes sometimes took longer to focus. The way she stared at a piece of wood as if it should have told her something, but didn't. Then came the day she forgot his name. It happened quietly, without drama. She turned to him, smiling, and asked about the coffee. But instead of Daniel, she used a different name. A name from her past. One he didn't recognize. He paused. She didn't notice. She went on talking as if nothing had changed. And when she left that afternoon, humming to herself under her breath, Daniel stood alone in the quiet that remained, heart heavy with something he couldn't explain yet. The forgetting continued, soft and slow. She left her bag behind one day. Another time, she walked the wrong direction home. Once, she came to the workshop on a Sunday. It was closed, and waited at the door for nearly an hour before she realized what day it was. Daniel found her sitting on the front steps, her expression distant. She looked at him, uncertain for a moment. Then, recognition came, not like a flash, but like light warming a window pane. She smiled faintly. That night, he wrote everything down. A notebook with clean pages, each entry simple. The date, the moment, the detail. Not because he wanted to track her decline, but because some part of him hoped that writing it down might keep her here just a little longer. When the diagnosis came, it arrived quietly too. Emma sat in a chair across from a doctor with kind eyes and soft-spoken words. She nodded as the sentences landed. Early onset, progressive, memory, support. The words filled the air like rain in a closed room. She didn't cry. Daniel sat beside her. His hand found hers, and she didn't let go. She looked at him, not with fear, but with something gentler, as if she already knew. before the doctor had said a word, as if part of her had been preparing to let go of herself, one piece at a time. In the days that followed, she became quieter. She still came to the workshop, but there were longer silences. Her eyes sometimes searched the walls as if trying to remember where she was. She placed objects in strange places, called tools by the wrong names. But there were good days, too. Days when she was herself again, clear, laughing, teasing Daniel for the way he frowned while carving. Days when she brewed the coffee exactly how he liked it and remembered which radio station played his favorite instrumental songs. On those days, Daniel said nothing about the others. He simply sat beside her, grateful for whatever time her mind allowed them. Because love, in its truest form, doesn't hold on tighter. It learns to hold softer. One evening, as the sky outside dimmed to blue, Emma stood at the doorway of the workshop, coat in hand. She looked around slowly, touched the edge of the table, ran her fingers along the wall where wood shavings gathered. Then she turned to Daniel, her voice low, almost childlike. "Will I forget all of this too?" He didn't answer with words. He walked over, gently took her hand, and guided her to sit beside him. The silence between them was full of memories, of ache, of devotion. And as the last light faded from the windows, they sat together in the warm hush of the workshop, surrounded by wood, by coffee cups, by pieces of days they had shared. Emma rested her head on his shoulder, and though she didn't say it, he felt it. She still knew him. Maybe not by name, maybe not always by memory, but by feeling. And for now, that was enough. There are illnesses that speak loudly, that arrive with sirens and sharp pain, with fevers and scans and urgency. But Emma's came like a fog. It whispered. It crept. It didn't shout. It erased. And the name of the illness was forgetting. It didn't hurt her body at first. She still looked like Emma, still moved with grace, still tied her hair with the same careful hands. But something behind her eyes began to change. The light there flickered. The focus blurred. The days no longer stacked evenly in her memory. Some fell through the cracks. Others folded in on themselves. Daniel adjusted quietly to the rhythm of her mind. He labeled drawers in the kitchen, left reminder notes on the door, wrote her name, Emma, on the bathroom mirror in erasable ink. When she forgot the day, he circled it on a calendar. When she left the stove on, he replaced it with one that turned off automatically. He didn't ask if she remembered things anymore. He simply adapted. Because love, real love, learns the language of change. He began speaking less, but his presence grew louder. He walked beside her more often, held her hand even when they didn't cross streets, left lights on even during the day, stayed close enough that she never had to look far for comfort. There were moments, brief, bright, precious, when she returned. When she looked at him and her eyes lit up, clear and certain. when she told a story from her childhood with every detail intact. When she remembered the name of his favorite wood, walnut, and touched it softly, smiling as if it too had a memory. On those days, Daniel felt something lift in his chest. Not hope exactly, but gratitude. The kind that makes you breathe more slowly. He never told her how much those days meant to him. He simply made soup, played soft music, let her nap on his shoulder as the sun moved across the floor. And when the fog returned, as it always did, he stayed. Some days she called him by the wrong name. Other days she didn't speak at all. Once, she stood in the hallway for nearly an hour, holding her shoes, unsure of what came next. She looked so still, so lost, as if time had left her behind. Daniel approached without a word, took the shoes from her hands, and gently placed them by the door. She didn't say thank you, but her shoulders softened. It was enough. Daniel began keeping a quiet journal. Not of her illness, but of her, the pieces of her that he refused to let disappear. A favorite phrase, the shape of her handwriting, the way she still tilted her head when curious, the way her fingers brushed his wrist when passing a spoon. He wrote so she would not vanish, not from the world, but from the memory of it. Because if she could no longer hold her own story, he would hold it for her. One morning, she forgot who he was entirely. He watched as she looked at him, eyes polite but blank, as if he were a visitor, a neighbor, a man passing through. She didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid. She simply didn't know. Daniel smiled, gently, like always. He poured coffee into her favorite cup, sat across from her as he had every morning before. Didn't try to explain. Didn't say, "It's me." He just waited for the warmth to return to her gaze, or for a word to spark memory, or for nothing at all. Because love, at its quietest, expects nothing in return, and he had long since stopped loving her for what she could remember. Now he loved her simply because she was still here. In the workshop, he carved smaller things now, delicate boxes, frames, pieces that could be finished quickly, so he never stayed away for too long. He taught her how to sand the edges, slowly, gently. On good days, she watched him work and smiled when the scent of wood reached her nose. On harder days, she simply sat by the window, staring at something invisible. But even on the hardest days, she never forgot how to sit beside him. And Daniel never forgot how to be still with her. So when the forgetting grew heavier, when her world narrowed, when time began to twist and stretch and disappear, Daniel held on to what remained, the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her breath at night, the way she still turned her face to the sun, as if her body remembered joy even when her mind could not. And each day, he introduced himself again, Not always with words, but with kindness, with routine, with presence. Because even when she forgot who she was, he remembered for them both. Autumn arrived slowly that year. It came not with wind or storms, but with gentleness, a hush in the trees, a softness in the air. The leaves outside the window turned gold, then amber, then the color of warm tea, and for a few weeks the world was wrapped in stillness. For Daniel, the season felt like a breath held between two moments. One hand in the past, one toe dipped into what was coming. A waiting room of the soul. Emma was still with him, but less often now. Some mornings, she forgot the shape of their home. Some afternoons, she mistook the sound of her own name. She stared at the mirror like it belonged to someone else. Her sketchbooks remained closed. Her pencils stayed untouched. But then, one morning, just as the light broke soft across the floorboards, something returned. Emma stood at the window, wrapped in an old cardigan. Her eyes were clear, her posture familiar. She turned slowly toward Daniel and smiled, not the half-smile of confusion, but the kind she used to wear on good days, the kind that reached all the way to the corners of her eyes. She remembered him. He didn't ask how much. He didn't say a word. He only walked toward her, and she let herself fall into his arms. That day became a gift. They spent it walking through a nearby park, where leaves crackled beneath their feet and children laughed in the distance. The path was quiet, littered with golden leaves, and the wind brushed through Emma's hair like a whisper. She walked beside him like before, steady, quiet, her hand in his coat pocket. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Emma paused often to touch tree bark, to pick up fallen leaves, to press her face toward the sun. Her eyes flickered with wonder, as if rediscovering things she once knew. The color of light on water, the smell of earth after rain, the feeling of wind against her cheeks. Daniel watched her like someone memorizing the final pages of a beloved book. Every gesture, every shadow. He held it all inside, quietly, carefully, afraid to blink too long, in case the moment slipped away. They returned home just before sunset. Daniel lit candles instead of turning on the lights. The room glowed golden and soft, as if trying to keep the outside world away for a little while longer. Emma curled up on the couch, a blanket around her knees, her head resting against his shoulder. Her breathing slowed. She reached for his hand without looking. It was the last truly peaceful evening they would share. He knew. And somehow, she did too. In the silence, there was no sorrow. Not yet. Just warmth. Just breath. Just the shape of love in its quietest form. Later that night, after she had fallen asleep, Daniel stood beside the window, looking out at the empty street. The leaves rustled softly in the dark. The moon hung low. The world looked exactly the same, unchanged, unaware. And yet, everything in him had shifted. That day, that walk, her smile, He folded it into his memory like a letter written without words. Because in the days to come, when her mind would no longer return, not even for a moment, he would need something to carry, something to hold in the cold. And this day, this final flicker of her full self, was the last warmth before the winter arrived. Winter came without warning. It didn't arrive with storms or ice, but with stillness, a quiet hush that settled over everything. The sky turned pale. The trees grew bare. The streets, once alive with leaves, now stretched long and empty under gray light. Inside the house, silence deepened. Emma no longer remembered the shape of the rooms. She walked the hallway as if it belonged to someone else. She opened drawers and left them open, stared at windows without speaking. Some mornings she dressed twice. Other days she stayed in bed, eyes wide open, unmoving. She had forgotten Daniel entirely. Not just his name, that had vanished weeks ago, but his face, his voice, the way they had once moved through time together. Now, when she looked at him, she saw only a kind stranger, a man who brought her tea, who folded her blanket, who helped her find the bathroom when she stood lost in the hallway. Daniel never corrected her, never asked, "Do you know me today?" He simply continued, as gently as always. He brushed her hair each morning, tying it loosely with the ribbon she used to wear. He made porridge just the way she liked it, though she never finished it anymore. He played soft piano music in the background, hoping the familiar melodies might reach something deep inside her that words could no longer touch. The hardest part wasn't the forgetting. It was that she had stopped looking for meaning at all. She no longer noticed when he entered the room, no longer smiled at the warmth of the sun, no longer asked questions, no longer hummed. It was as if her mind had curled inward into some place he could not follow. Daniel felt it. Each day, a little more of her drifted away, like snow melting beneath his feet, slowly, silently, without pain, but with cold finality. He missed her laughter. Not the sound of it. He still remembered that clearly. But the way it used to fill space between them. He missed her hands on the coffee cup, the way she once tilted her head when she asked about his day. He missed the sketchbooks, the stray pencil lines on the table, the way she used to press her forehead against his shoulder when tired. But now the house was filled only with shadows of those things. He lived beside her. But the woman he loved had become a quiet echo. One night, during the deepest part of winter, snow fell for hours. Daniel stayed awake long after she had gone to bed. He sat in the living room, the window fogged, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. In front of him sat a wooden box, small, simple, polished with care. Inside it were keepsakes, a dried flower from the park, her old sketching pencil, a note she once left on his workbench that read, "Don't forget to eat today." He touched each item like a prayer. The world outside was silent. No footsteps, no cars, no sound but the soft ticking of the clock. And in that silence, something broke inside him. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, like a thread stretched too far, snapping in the dark. He didn't cry. He simply sat there, holding her memories in his hands, feeling their weight, their warmth, and the quiet ache of loving someone who was still here, but no longer reachable. In the weeks that followed, he found peace not in her memory, but in presence. He read to her in the mornings, not stories, but pieces of their life. Entries from his journals, descriptions of walks they once took, the sound of leaves underfoot, the scent of pine, the laughter from a cafe they once passed. She didn't respond, but he read anyway. Because love, even when invisible, leaves a trail. And sometimes, simply walking that trail is enough. Daniel never stopped showing up. Each day he brushed her hair. Each day he lit the candle in the window. Each day he told her who she had been, even if she no longer heard it. And in doing so, he kept her alive, not in her own mind, but in the quiet, faithful space between them. A winter without her voice, but never without her presence. A season of endings, and also a season of staying. Spring arrived without celebration. There were no trumpets of color, no sudden rush of bloom. It came gently, like a whisper, soft green tips on bare branches, the scent of damp earth, bird song faint as breath. And inside their small home, Daniel moved through the days with the same quiet care, tending to the life that remained. Emma no longer spoke. Her eyes were often distant, watching something only she could see. Her body had grown thinner. Her hands, once always moving, sketching, reaching, brushing back hair, now rested quietly in her lap, unmoving. And yet, Daniel still read to her. Every morning, with the first light, he pulled up a chair and opened one of her old journals. Sometimes it was poetry, sometimes just a list she had once made. Favorite teas, songs she wanted to learn, places she hoped to visit. He read each word softly, as if it still mattered, as if she could still hear it through the fog. Sometimes she blinked slowly, and he imagined, or perhaps only hoped, that she remembered. But whether she did or not no longer changed what he gave, because his promise had never been tied to her memory, only to her. One evening, as dusk brushed gold across the sky, Daniel wheeled her out onto the balcony. The air was warm, touched by the breath of spring. The trees across the street had begun to flower, tiny pale blossoms swaying in the light wind. He placed a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her, their hands resting side by side. They sat for a long while without movement, without words. And then, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, her head tilted ever so slightly, her cheek leaned toward him, barely, softly, like the memory of a habit long faded. Daniel closed his eyes. In that moment, he imagined it all. Her voice calling his name, her laughter beside the window, her fingers stained with graphite and pencil dust. He imagined the version of her that had once run through autumn leaves, danced barefoot in the kitchen, sketched light as if it could be captured. And then he let the image go, not to forget it, but to let it live freely, unburdened by grief. A memory that didn't ache anymore. Emma passed quietly one morning, as soft as breath slipping through fingertips. Daniel sat beside her, holding her hand until the last moment, his thumb gently tracing the back of her wrist, not to keep her here, but to accompany her to the edge. There were no final words, no last looks, only peace, and a quiet that felt full. In the days that followed, the house remained unchanged. Her books stayed on the shelf, her slippers by the bed, her pencil, dulled at the tip, still resting near the window. Daniel did not rush to pack them away. Instead, he opened the windows each morning, let in the light, and made coffee, still 2 cups, out of habit more than hope. He drank one. He placed the other near the chair she used to sit in. And then he began to walk again. Back to the old park. Back to the place where leaves once fell beneath their feet. Back to the workshop. He picked up wood again, slow at first. His hands remembered the motion, the texture, the warmth of shaping something out of silence. And one day, he carved a small box. Smooth, simple. Inside, he placed a folded note. Just one sentence. You were loved until the end, and beyond. Years later, people who met him often described Daniel as a quiet man. Kind, steady, always gentle. They didn't know his story, only that he smiled often, and sometimes, in the quietest moments, looked at the sky as if speaking to someone who lived inside the light. They never knew the full weight of what he had carried, and yet, he carried it well. Because Daniel never asked life to return what it had taken. He simply gave back what he could, every day, every time, in silence, in memory, in love. Love does not disappear when memory fades. It lingers in the things left behind, in worn sketchbooks and coffee cups, in the way sunlight falls across a room at dusk. It echoes in the heart of those who stay, who remember, who carry the quiet promises long after the final page is turned. And sometimes, even when the name is gone, even when the voice is silent, the feeling remains. Still warm, still whole, still enough. This was their story. Emma and Daniel. A love that lived softly and lasted even when everything else disappeared. Some love stories don't begin with confessions. They begin with a quiet gaze, a chair left empty for someone who hasn't arrived yet, a cup of coffee placed beside someone's hand. Not because they asked, but because it felt right. And sometimes they don't end with goodbyes. They fade, slowly, softly, like twilight at the edge of day. The story of Emma and Daniel is that kind of love. Not passionate, not dramatic, but profoundly tender. A love that speaks through stillness. A love that stays even when memory leaves. It is the kind of love where there are no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Only quiet consistency, gentle attention, daily care. Daniel didn't love Emma for what she could give back. He loved her for who she was, even when she no longer remembered who that person had been. As Emma slowly forgot her world, Daniel remembered for her. He didn't fight the illness. He didn't beg the past to stay. He simply adapted, writing down what she forgot, sitting quietly when she was lost, speaking softly even when she didn't respond. Because sometimes to truly love someone is not to hold them tighter, but to hold them gently as they slip further away. And perhaps that's the most powerful kind of love. The love that continues when there is no recognition, no reward, no shared future. Only presence. Daniel's love teaches us something most stories never say out loud. That love is not about being remembered. It's about remembering for the other person when they cannot. He didn't stay because he was hopeful. He stayed because he promised to love, even if she forgot the promise. Even when her mind was gone, her body frail, her words silent, Daniel remained. Not out of duty, but out of something deeper than memory, something more enduring than time. This story doesn't break our hearts because it's tragic. It touches us because it's true. It reminds us that love doesn't always need words. That sometimes the purest expression of devotion is in the small things, folding a blanket, making tea, sitting in silence without expecting anything in return. Emma may have lost her way inside her own mind, but Daniel never lost his way to her. And that's the quiet miracle of this story. So, if you're listening to this before sleep, let it remind you, true love doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It softens. It stays, even when everything else fades. Because when the person you love forgets who they are, sometimes the greatest act of love is simply this: to remember for them. Though Emma and Daniel are fictional, their story reflects something deeply real. All around us, quietly, invisibly, there are people loving like this. Spouses caring for partners who no longer speak. Children holding the hands of parents who no longer remember their names. Caregivers showing up each day for someone who may never say thank you. These are the kinds of love that don't make headlines, but they are perhaps the most profound. Because they teach us that love isn't just romance or grand gestures or beautiful memories. Love is also patience, presence, and faithfulness, especially when things are no longer easy or fair or returned. We live in a world that celebrates what's visible, but in quiet homes, behind closed doors, there are people who are showing us what love really means. In silence, in sacrifice, in staying. If you are one of those people, or if you have ever loved someone through illness, memory loss, distance, or time, then you already know. The truest kind of love doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be lived. To the one listening right now, whether you're drifting into sleep or quietly reflecting, please remember, you are worthy of this kind of love, the kind that stays, the kind that listens, the kind that doesn't disappear when things get hard, and maybe, even more importantly, you are capable of giving it. The world needs more love that is patient, more love that doesn't give up, more love that shows up quietly every day. So if you're holding on to someone, through illness, through memory, through time, you are not alone. And if you've ever lost someone who forgot you, know that what you gave still matters. It lives on, quietly, deeply, beautifully. Because real love, even when forgotten, is never wasted. And so, our story comes to a quiet close. Somewhere between memory and forgetting, between staying and letting go, a promise was kept, softly, faithfully, until the very end. Thank you for spending this time with us, for letting your heart rest in a story about love, not loud or perfect, but steady and true. Lulu Audio wishes you a peaceful night. May your dreams be gentle, your heart be light, and your sleep deep and kind. Until next time, close your eyes, listen to the rain, and drift away. Good night.